Craig Murray is joining us right now. He is an author. He's a journalist. He's a human rights activist. He's many things. He's also running for Parliament in Britain right now as we speak. Craig, thank you so much for coming on the Sunday Wire this week.
Thank you very much for enjoying, Patrick.
So first off, Craig, there's a few things I'd love to get your views on, things that are happening in the world, things that are affecting the UK, affecting Europe, and affecting everybody. And we'll talk about all these key issues. One of those is what's happening in the Middle East, obviously. I know you've got some great insights and some really important opinions on that, as well as what's happening between Russia and NATO. It's another area of concern. But we also wanted to point to your great effort right now in the UK general election, Craig, and just tell us a little bit about what you're going for, your constituency. I know there's some history there with Blackburn as well. But if you'd like to share that with us, I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, I'm standing here in the constituency of Blackburn, and I'm standing for the Workers' Party, which is led by George Galloway. And George won the seat of Rochdale, which is literally half an hour down the road, which he won in a by-election a few months ago. And he won entirely on the issue of Gaza, because the communities here are very angry about Gaza and very angry about the fact that both the main political parties in England, the Labour and Conservative parties, are both effectively supporters of the genocide that's happened. So I'm standing to give people an anti-genocide alternative, if you like, to give somebody else to vote for who actually offers a real choice. And it goes a bit wider than that, obviously, in that, we also offer a real choice in economic policy, because the remarkable thing is that last night there was a battle between a televised debate between Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and leader of the opposition Keir Starmer, in which Keir Starmer frequently appeared to be from the right of Rishi Sunak, to the right of the Conservative Party, and that really is where the Labour Party now is on most issues. And certainly they outbid each other in their desire to support Israel and Israel's right to so-called self-defense. So we're giving people something else to vote for, and that's really it. And it would be great to win, but even if we don't win, we're actually trying to put some meaning into democracy and give people a chance to vote for something different to happen as a result of your vote. Because in the political system in the UK and in the political system in the United States, the chance to vote for real change is very small indeed.
And I know since George Galloway surprised everybody in Rochdale at the by-election, the Workers' Party of Britain's kind of filling a gap, isn't it? Because, like you said, I mean, Labour did swing very much to the center, if not further, according to Margaret Thatcher herself, New Labour under Tony Blair. But it seems to have gone even further. And it's very hard to distinguish the difference between what either Labour or Conservative parties are offering. There's almost no difference. They seem to be pretty much on point on all policies together. And I think the foreign policy issue is obviously something the Workers' Party is very strong on. George Galloway is very strong and engaged in international issues and geopolitics. So do you find that a lot of people that are getting interested in this new party and your campaign and others, Chris Williamson also, do you think that there's these are people who are younger? Can you make any observations of what type of people are that you're attracting?
I mean, I think we're attracting a very broad range of people. Blackburn is a very mixed race community in that about 52% of the population is from the indigenous white English population, and about 48% of people are from immigrant populations, although mostly those are, many of those are third and even fourth generation immigrants by now. It's a well-established Asian, largely, population, but it's very mixed in that way. And I would say that one of the things which is very heartening is that the awareness of the genocide in Gaza is enormous, and the fury of the genocide in Gaza is enormous. And almost nobody has said to me, "Well, that's a long way away. Why do we care? You're standing for election in Blackburn. Why do you keep talking about Gaza?" I was rather fearing there may be quite a few people who felt that way, but I've met almost nobody, and it's across the communities. We had a great launch meeting on Sunday with both George Galloway and myself here in Blackburn. And the audience effectively, pretty accurately reflected the demographic breakdown. It was not a case at all that there were more Muslims or more Asians disproportionately there. The issue absolutely has grasped everybody. And I've been here a week or so now, so I'm with some leaflets out and posters out and things, and enough to get some face recognition in the town. And I'm walking downtown, and all kinds of people are coming out and yelling, "Hi, Craig." People seem automatically to realise you can address me by my first name, which is maybe more unusual here than it would be in the States. But people are automatically coming out. I'm just walking along the street, and folk are yelling, "Hi, Craig," and raising their fists and beeping on their horns, and it's an extremely warm perception. How that's going to translate through into voting is something, of course, we will have to see. But it's actually very gratifying to be here. It's really very pleasant to be here. And one of the things, just one little anecdote, because I'm away from my home standing here. And at least a dozen people have stopped me in the street, including, I should say, an opposing candidate, and asked me if I'm eating okay, and offering to send round food and to do all kinds of other things to make me comfortable. Extremely warm, hospitable people.
Yeah, and I think what we saw with George Galloway's surprise victory in Rochdale is that a lot of people came out to vote that would have normally sat out the election because they just weren't engaged in politics, and he sort of fired up something in a lot of people to really activate them. Do you see the same thing happening in this constituency?
Absolutely. In fact, funnily enough, I just had that discussion with my election agent, because when you get the electoral register from the local authority, the roll of voters, if you pay an extra £250, they'll give you one on which is marked all the people who voted in the last election. And those who didn't bother to vote in the last general election, are not marked. And my agent was trying to convince me that we needed that because we need to concentrate on the people who voted, that there's statistically little point in chasing non-voters, because if they didn't vote last time, they won't vote this time. Now I was saying to him, no, actually, the people who didn't bother to turn out and vote for any of the idiots they could vote for at the last election, they're exactly the people we want. So we're going for everybody. We're not going for people who have been, only for people who've been involved in the past in the party system. This is a campaign to bring people back in. And in fact, I think it could even be an opposite effect, that those people who have felt a strong loyalty, especially to the Labour Party, probably feel so disillusioned that I suspect many of those will actually sit at home on their hands. A lot of the real party loyalists, they'll feel unable to vote for Keir Starmer, given his position of, as he calls it, unequivocal support for Israel, to quote him, given his support for continued arms sales to Israel, given his reluctance to call for a ceasefire. They won't be able to vote for him. They'll find it difficult to abandon a long-held party loyalty, and they may well just stay at home. I should say, normally, this is a massively solid, safe Labour seat. This is a working-class town, and it's one of the largest majorities in the entire country. It's one of the safest seats in the entire country, may even be the safest seat. They normally poll well over 60% of the vote here, and against 2 or 3 other candidates. I think last time they had a lead of about 40% over the candidate who came second. So, normally normally you wouldn't even consider this a seat which might possibly change hands normally. But Rochdale was rather similar.
Yeah, what I noticed, seeing a lot of your supporters on social media, very international, and from different ethnic backgrounds, different nationalities, their families immigrated to Britain from different places all around the world. These are all people that I think they're very inspired by the strong stance that you've taken on this issue, and we've seen the horrific images. I'll put a few on screen here. What we've seen over the last 8 months, Craig, you've seen a lot in your life in terms of war, conflict, things that are happening around the world throughout your life. Have you ever seen anything like what we've seen, unfold in the last 8 months and continues to unfold? The devastation, the scale of it, the amount of death, and the kind of wanton militarism that's being displayed by Israel and its backers on this, Craig. I mean, this has really touched the hearts of people, and people who have very, very strong and passionate views on this. People that might not have been so engaged before, they are absolutely showing themselves all around the world to support the Palestinian cause in a way that I personally had never expected to see in my lifetime. Craig, can you speak to this kind of upsurge on this issue, this phenomenon?
Yeah. I think the important thing to say is, of course, that the genocide of the Palestinians has been going on for 76 years. It hasn't just started, but it's in a particularly hot period, which has just been awful, and which, of course, everyone has been able to witness on their phones. And so people have seen it in a way that even 20 years ago, we couldn't see. The destruction of Mosul and Fallujah by the United States, which killed just as many women and children. The United States Army killed just as many women and children in Mosul and Fallujah. But we weren't able to watch that live on our mobile phones because the smartphone technology wasn't widespread enough at that time. So this is particularly immediate, and people can see. I mean, in those days, of course, the mainstream media could omit to tell people sins of omission, downplaying, distortion of what was happening. People got the picture they got from their televisions and newspapers. Whereas now people still get that false picture, but now people can see on their mobile phones that the picture they are getting from a television and newspapers is false, and that's why, that really the Zionist lobby and the politicians are panicking. They've lost their grip. I never, ever thought we would see public opinion in the United States switch to being majority support for the Palestinians. And that's what we are seeing. And I would never have believed it. I mean, I'm absolutely delighted by that aspect. Obviously, I'm horrified by the death and suffering. And I've reached the stage where I just can't watch. I just cannot. I'm scared now to turn on Twitter because the emotional impact the cumulative emotional impact of it has become difficult to stand, difficult to bear. I was saying the other day that I found I couldn't actually look at my own children without crying, because looking at my own children made me see images of similar looking children, think of those who had lost their children in Palestine, and that, of course, is a devastating situation. But the immediacy with which we are experiencing this. And the other thing I'd say, just about comparing it to past experiences, I was in Sierra Leone and I was in Liberia during the wars there. And in fact, I was involved in negotiating a peace settlement of the wars there, including, for example, I was negotiating directly with Charles Taylor, who's now for war crimes in The Hague, is in jail for war crimes connected to the events with which I was negotiating. And I saw terrible things. I saw terrible things there firsthand, with my own eyes. I saw them unfold before me, and I saw things I will never forget. But even dealing with the rebel forces in Sierra Leone and dealing with Charles Taylor and his people in Liberia, I experienced more humanity and more understanding and less delight in atrocity that I'm seeing today from Israel. And those people were described unanimously, because they were African, of course, as barbarians and savages and uncivilized and animals. And they were people who had come from a background of extreme deprivation and hardship and of exploitation, and they were still being exploited by people wanting to control the mineral resource. But the actual people committing the atrocities were almost entirely uneducated, deeply, deeply underprivileged people in Africa. They were the people carrying out some atrocities. Whereas in Israel, you are seeing educated, wealthy people carrying out atrocities on poorer people. And I just can't get my head around it. I cannot understand it. It is, to me, utterly inexplicable. It's the lowest possible depth of depravity.
Yeah, it's breathtaking, to say the least. What would what does the British government need to do? What if you were in a position to advise or to lay out some sort of a course of action right now, in your mind, Craig? What would you like to see happen from a British government point of view?
I think we need to deal with Israel exactly as we needed to deal with apartheid South Africa in the longer term, in terms of boycott, sanctions, disinvestment, ending all trade, ending all investment, cutting all links. Personally, any Israeli state or state-linked or arms assets in the UK, I would seize them. And immediately, I think we need a no-fly zone cleared over Gaza to prevent the Israelis bombing and using missiles. Those are the immediate steps I would take, and I would also join the genocide action at the ICJ. The problem is, of course, that after the genocide is proved against South Africa at the ICJ, we are almost certainly going to see actions at the ICJ succeed for complicity against the United Kingdom and the United States. I think that's liable to come ahead as well. I would like to see a new British government actually not only cease for complicity, but jail those currently in power, currently responsible for the complicity, because complicity in genocide is actually a crime in UK domestic law, as well as a crime in international law. It's specifically a domestic law crime in the United Kingdom. So I think we should see actions against those who have been in power.
Well, one thing is for certain: if you are successful, and we hope that you are in your run for Parliament, somebody with your experience in international law and dealing with some of these matters directly throughout your career, as well as your career in the Foreign Service, I think it would be a great asset to the House of Commons. But where would Britain be, however, in terms of, it's a signatory to the Rome Statute. It recognizes the ICC. What if arrest warrants are issued for Benjamin Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, other Israeli officials, and then Netanyahu comes to travel to Britain, to Westminster? What do you think the British government would do? Would they exercise such an arrest warrant for the ICC, or would they just stand down? Do you know anybody who's had any opinion on this, or what are people saying?
Keir Starmer has been asked, and he has refused to commit, which is disgraceful. The British government has stated that they think that the application for an arrest warrant is unwarranted, and they've said that they do not believe the ICC has jurisdiction, which is complete nonsense. I mean, there is no argument the ICC doesn't have jurisdiction, because it defines its own jurisdiction over the terms of the Treaty of Rome. It has accepted Palestine as a member of the Treaty of Rome, as a member of the court, which gives it jurisdiction over actions inside the Palestinian territories. And it has had an expert group report to the court on this exact question, which recommended the court does have jurisdiction, and the court has accepted that ruling. So there just is no argument that there is no jurisdiction. The difficulty is that the actions of Israel have exposed utterly the fact that the politicians in the West, in most of the West, are controlled by the Zionist lobby. And because they're controlled by the Zionist lobby, and because they have a long history of being either bribed or compromised, they have no choice now but to back Israel, whatever it does. Even to the point where they are repudiating the liberal institutions of international law which the West set up, utterly repudiating them. That the United States repudiates the International Criminal Court is not a great surprise, but that the United States actually repudiates the International Court of Justice is a huge surprise. And people, they seem to have forgotten that when the International Court of Justice found that there was a plausible risk of genocide, take the case forward, the chairman of the court was a US State Department lawyer. That's how she got the job. So this kind of dropping of all pretense. And it's dropping of all pretense internationally and dropping of all pretense at home, where they're completely willing to abolish freedom of speech and to beat up their own citizens in the interests of Israel. Yeah, I find that, again, things are happening I would not believe could happen. And they're happening in a way which I think is opening the eyes of the population to the dislocation of the political class from the will of the people. And in the long term, good may come out of all of this.
Yeah, we hope so. At a huge price, of course, but nonetheless, we have to look at the potential positive outcomes on this. I mean, the Middle East situation, certainly, this is a tinderbox waiting to go up in flames with a few more buttons pushed. Namely with possibly an attack on Iran. They're very hawkish in Washington. They're threatening to sanction now. They're trying to pass a bill to sanction the ICC in Washington. I mean, what kind of problems does that present, Craig? If the U.S. and Britain have a special relationship, they're allies. Britain's a signatory to the ICC. The U.S. is now sanctioning and attacking members as well, threatening the prosecutors. Even Karim Khan would be, on that list, as it were, that's being drawn up in Washington right now. What kind of problems does this present with the relationship with the United States and Britain?
Well, I mean, it ought to present huge problems. But of course, if either Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer remains Prime Minister after the election, it won't actually present any problems at all because the UK will just give in. Whether the UK courts and whether institutions like the House of Lords have the ability to put up some kind of residual fight for legality, we will wait to see. But the government, of course, in the UK, Parliament, we don't have a constitution. Parliament has the ability to propose any legislation it likes and make any constitutional alteration it likes and to change any law it likes just as a whim. So if legal changes are needed to protect Israel in these circumstances, which I think they would do, you'd have to actually amend the Criminal Court Act of 2005, I think it is. You'd have to amend the International Criminal Court Act, or you would have to give effect to the warrant. But they could just do it. They could run it through Parliament. You'd get Labour friends of Israel, Conservative friends of Israel, have a large majority in Parliament between them, alter the legislation to give impunity to Netanyahu. I can definitely see that happening, and it's astonishing. But to react to a court case by threatening the judges and threatening the prosecutors, it's just mafia behaviour. It is massive illegality in either domestic or international law. You do not react to a legal case by threatening the judge and threatening the prosecutor. That everybody involved in threatening the judges or the prosecutor, all of the American politicians involved and all of their staff who have had any involvement, all should be jailed. That is as bad a crime as you can imagine. There's no greater attack on the very notion of judges than threatening prosecutors and judges for doing their job.
And just to shift over to the other theater of concern, Craig, which is Ukraine, but not just Ukraine. Now it's a European-wide issue and maybe a global issue. This story came out in the New York Times as well as the Washington Post here. U.S. concerns about Ukraine strikes on Russian early warning nuclear radar stations 1,000 kilometers inside Russia after getting the green light. According to a leak to Politico last week, Joe Biden supposedly quietly gave a green light to Kiev to use U.S. weapons to hit targets in Russia, and they're doing that. Early warning nuclear radar stations, and I hear a lot of talk about war with Russia right now coming out of London, coming out of Washington. Craig, your comments on this. These used to be red lines that we dared not cross, but they seem to be kind of, dismissed out of hand now. If you even raise such concerns, you're being accused of being a Russian sympathizer. Talk to the current environment, Craig, right now. What are your concerns? How close are we to World War III? Is there potential to pull back from the brink?
We are definitely closer to World War III than we have been at any time in my life. We're closer to World War III than we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the politicians seem so careless and oblivious about it that there's just not an appropriate level of worry. They seem to think they can just carry on with this phased behavior. There is no possible way to win the war. I put win in inverted commas in Ukraine. There's no possible way to defeat Russia in Ukraine that does not involve inflicting so much damage within Russia that it would definitely spark a nuclear war. The conventional war inside Ukraine is not winnable. Ukraine is running out of people, literally, who are able and willing to fight on the front lines, and larger frontline collapses are fairly imminent. And to respond to that by launching strikes deeper and deeper into Russia itself is a deliberate policy. I'm not sure. You said you'd heard that Biden quietly gave the green light. I'm not sure it was that quiet. They seem quite openly to be advocating striking deeper and deeper into Russia and giving Ukraine permission to launch missiles that can do this thing. It's not plain to me that they specifically said it's okay, you can take out their nuclear attack early warning systems. I suppose if you are intending on a sustained long-range missile barrage into Russia, it makes sense to take out the defenses, which is what they are doing. But those, of course, are the defenses that protect Russia from nuclear attack rather than conventional attack. So Russia is entitled to see this as an existential threat. It's not mad for Russia to see this as an existential threat. They are removing Russia's ability to defend itself against a nuclear attack. And those people who support nuclear weapons and oppose unilateral nuclear disarmament, they support nuclear weapons on the basis of this kind of balance of deterrence. But you just lost the balance of deterrence if you take out Russia's nuclear defense systems. All balance is gone, and the chances of one side or the other launching a preemptive strike become very much greater. So this is all just crazy. And it's for a war that cannot be won. Nobody at all is benefiting from this war except for the arms industry, who are making an absolute fortune, and politicians with corrupt links to the arms industry who are making an absolute fortune. Everybody else is suffering. And in the end, there will have to be a diplomatic resolution. And that diplomatic resolution is not going to look very different to how it would have looked 2 years ago. It will be slightly better for Russia than it would have been 2 years ago. And with every day that passes, it gets slightly better for Russia because Russia increases the facts on the ground in its favor. The only way the only way physically you can stop that is by launching attacks on Russia, which undoubtedly would provoke nuclear war. So there is no rationality at all. I can see no logic whatsoever to Biden's strategy. It appears utterly mad and utterly hopeless. I presume Biden's strategy is to stave off admitting the defeat of Ukraine until after the general election. But that's and to do that by taking risk after risk after risk on grounds that, well, it's not going to go too far before the general election, before the presidential election. And so we will be able to get away with it. We'll just stave off the problem a bit. But this is extremely dangerous, and it's risking the whole world for his re-election, which is not a very rational choice.
And we hear a lot of naysayers are saying, "Oh, don't worry about Russia, Craig." They say they're just bluffing. They're not going to escalate. We can, continue to put pressure on them, and they deserve it anyway because we need to win in Ukraine. If we don't win in Ukraine, then Putin's going to march all the way to Calais and the English Channel and plant a Russian flag on Omaha Beach. And they constantly, people alluding back to World War II, the Sudetenland. We keep hearing these World War II references, these imperial references. Are you noticing some of this rhetoric? And do you think this is a systemic problem? Like this has kind of infected the minds of the political class, as it's people talking about winning a nuclear war rather than mutually assured destruction. It's almost like, well, the Mad Doctrine doesn't really apply. We can actually win this. If we do X, Y, and Z. Have you noticed some of the rhetoric that's swirling around right now in the political spheres? And then what can be done about this? How dangerous is this?
These people are incredibly dangerous, and it is extraordinary that people like Stoltenberg at NATO and von der Leyen at the European Union, some of these extreme hawks are in power and talking this utter nonsense. What is plain, and I've been arguing this for 20 years now, is that Putin has always had an agenda to absorb back into Russia those parts of the former Soviet Union which are majority Russian speaking. That's what he's been trying to do. It's what he was trying to do in Georgia, obviously. It's what he's trying to do now in the Ukraine. And that is an agenda he has, which obviously involves removing sovereign territory or removing control of sovereign territory from other nations. And national boundaries, of course, are largely accidents of history. Most of them are accidents of imperial conquest by somebody. And so, how evil or how sensible in terms of regulating a more peaceful world in future that notion is, you can debate it. You can debate that it's absolutely wrong to try to change national boundaries in this way. You can argue that the Soviet boundaries were extremely artificial, but it was an anomaly that major Russian-speaking populations therefore were left outside Russia at the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it's best to tidy it up. You could argue either way. But whichever way you argue it, it is, I think, beyond doubt that Putin has never wanted to annex anywhere that wasn't majority Russian-speaking, has never tried to take any territory, never sought expansion into anywhere that is not majority Russian-speaking. The idea that he wants, to take all the territory to Calais is just utter nonsense. There's no evidence of it whatsoever, and it's simply completely untrue. But we have to be fed this lie in order to feed the monster that is the armaments industry and the military and the security complex, all of whom, of course, enjoy a very privileged economic position in our society and live off the rest of us. Frankly, they are the parasites on our society who get very fat at the expense of the work of all of us. So that's what it's actually about. But the underlying narrative is just utter nonsense, and it's astonishing their ability to maintain this kind of nonsense and push it out through the propaganda mill and get people to believe it.
One of the battlegrounds here is Brussels, Craig. The EU has developed into something very different than the common market back when it was introduced. Now, with Ursula von der Leyen, the current European Commissioner, is kind of demanding a sort of complete unitary foreign policy of EU member states, and NATO seems to be a big part of that. They have to identify with NATO as well as have identical foreign policy goals. We've seen what happened to EU members that are drifting outside of that consensus, like Hungary or Slovakia. Their prime minister was an attempted assassination only a few weeks ago, Robert Fico. We hope he recovers fully. It'll be very interesting, and looking forward to hearing what he has to say when he is fit and recovered. But what do you think about the development of Brussels in all of this? Because it's not the same Brussels as 20 years ago, is it?
It's completely and utterly different. I used to be quite an enthusiast for the European Union. I used to see it as a force for social and economic integration on the continent. And I used to actually even to be an enthusiast for European foreign policy as a counterweight to the United States. Because what we have now is a new demand of European foreign policy under the heel of NATO and as a vassal of the United States, sort of unified aggression towards the enemies identified by the United States and by NATO for various motives. So I find it impossible to support the European Union now, and I would not actually wish to rejoin it, despite all the social and some economic disadvantages of being out of it. The notion of independence in European foreign policy appears to have disappeared completely. We really are in a situation where the neoliberal world has established a set of things you have to believe in, and that includes a uniform view of foreign policy. It includes support for Israel, and it includes opposition to Russia. It includes opposition to China. And why China is treated as an enemy, I have no idea at all, because China has manifested zero territorial ambition outside of China. What is there about China that makes it an enemy? Well, why are we meant to be paranoid about China when almost everything material that we buy comes from China? We couldn't survive without it. That's another aspect, apart from the hot war in the Ukraine. This insistence on a policy both of antagonizing Russia as far as possible and antagonizing China as far as possible is, I think, the braggart behavior of the bully who knows he's losing power. If the United States is losing its economic hegemony and its ability to throw its weight around like this, I think is limited. I think the end is in sight, and that might explain the extreme assertiveness and the desire to get the economic backing of Europe and power of Europe welded to the United States in order to try to provide this opposition to China, and Russia combined, this opposition to Iran, this ultra-aggressive Middle Eastern policy, to try to get the kind of economic force that can force that kind of policy through against Chinese and Russian opposition requires a degree of unity, which is being enforced. And it's also being enforced by delegitimizing and even attacking states within Europe that do not accept that line.
Yeah, I think it's also going to take a high degree of skill from Western diplomats, very carefully negotiating those relationships, especially with an emerging power that has arrived, like China, as you say, Craig. Back at home, however, there's talk about conscription. Funny enough, after all these decades, after the Second World War, I know you've got an opinion on this. I'm going to play you a clip from the campaign trail of the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, where he was confronted by a young activist, or looks like a student, probably in his early 20s, who opposed this idea of conscription in the UK. And the reaction by Sunak, the prime minister, is quite shocking. He mocks the student. It's quite an extraordinary clip. I want to play this, and I want to get your reaction to this issue and also this scene as well, Craig. Go ahead. We're going to watch this right now.
Idea. Really lovely idea, and it was great. I'm glad we did it. So, right, do you want to vote? Yeah, I was just going to ask, why do you hate young people so much? You're making us go to the army. You're making us. No, you'll have a choice. You'll have a choice. I've volunteered all my life, and then you will love it. You will love it. Why do I have to do it again when I'm finally coming out of education? And then because I think that a culture of I wouldn't do it like that. A culture of service is a good thing for our country, and you'll have a choice. You're welcome.
I mean, incredible, Craig. Your thoughts, your reactions on this issue, this scene?
Rishi Sunak comes from a background of great privilege. He's never had to interact much with ordinary people, and he doesn't know how to interact with ordinary people. And I think that comes over. I mean, I'm happy to say that his conscription idea has been very widely mocked in the UK, and they're really only very old people and a few extreme right wingers think it's a good idea. It's an idea which we all thought had disappeared in the 1980s. It used to be something which people with fond memories of World War II for some reason used to say quite regularly. It was a mockable. I don't think we used the word meme in those days, but it was a mockable meme of old people that young people should all be conscripted and sent to the army in the 1980s. And everyone thought it was hilarious. The idea that this would come back as an idea now, but the fact it has come back is another example of this rampant militarism, this extraordinary desire for super nationalistic saber rattling, which is going on. It's amazing that they feel able to say it at all, and you have to put it together with the attacks on people at demonstrations, the attacks on anybody at camps for Palestine, happening all over the Western world. Perfectly peaceful demonstrators and protesters protesting for the Palestinians are being attacked by the police, and the idea that you will force young people into some kind of military or organized conscription, even if it's not military, boot camp volunteering, that plainly is a reaction to the social unrest which the situation in Gaza has sparked.
Yes, and again, the calls NATO needs to mobilize 300,000 troops this week. There's people drawing up these plans. I know they've been drawing up these plans constantly, Craig, but there just seems to be this constant push from the managerial class and a huge gulf of what they see, what they want for Europe, for the world, for Britain, for the U.S., and then what the people actually want. And this gulf seems to be increasing, not to mention the wealth gap, which is also increasing at a record pace right now in history. So, my question to you is, what can we do, or what can you recommend? I know if you are successful in your run, you'll be in a position to influence policy. How can we redress some of these issues and bring things back to a saner place?
Yeah, I'm happy to say I don't see any reflection in the general population of this desire for war or for warmongering among the political class. In fact, it led me to say to someone the other day, well, what if the politicians held a war and nobody came? That's rather what it feels like. I think making very plain that we are not going to fight anyone is something which everybody could do. We obviously need a period of détente with Russia in particular and with China. We need some trade regulation where trade issues are decoupled from any warmongering over obscure man-made islands or Taiwan, which are totally separate issues and need to be decoupled from trade. But this crazy desire to link trade to issues where there's no chance of influencing China. It's not like you can organize an economic boycott of China. The entire world would collapse. So decoupling these issues, having a whole series of diplomatic talks to initiate détente. But we know how to do détente. We did détente with the Soviet Union. And any diplomat could give you a blueprint of détente. You start with decoupling issues, then you go to a series of competence-building measures. You have high-level visits. It's easy to change the atmosphere. It's easy to start again. And it's easy to adopt a mindset that cooperation makes us all healthier and wealthier and less liable to kill ourselves. So but it requires a fundamental reversal of policy. And the trouble is that the people who are in power at the moment have this strong financial incentive to bang the drum of war because of the vast corruption engendered by the arms industry, by the security industry, and also by the military, and also just by all the boomerang aid that goes into Ukraine and comes straight out again into the offshore bank accounts of Ukrainian politicians, into chalets in Switzerland, or into the pockets of Western politicians. And the extraordinary thing is everybody knows this happens. There's nobody listening to me who would say, oh, that doesn't happen. It does happen. Some people seem to think it's not important. I think it's very important. But the difficulty is that the entire political class is bought into and benefits from the system where, as you say, the wealth gap between rich and poor expands exponentially all the time, and is done so at the risk of exhausting the resources of the earth and at the risk of creating divisions and war over allocation of resources. And that's where we are.
And lastly, and again, I appreciate you joining us, Craig, and appreciate your time. I know you're busy on the campaign trail. We'll talk at the end. I'll give you a chance to give our audience a shout out how they can support you and what you're doing as well. But there's another issue that's very close to your heart. Obviously, you have a very personal connection with Julian Assange, who is still being held as a Category A prisoner in Belmarsh prison, unconvicted. No indication of when they're going to let him out. I know he's won this fresh right of appeal recently. I think this is a great glimmer of hope here in his case. But your thoughts, and then what do you think should be happening at the Westminster level to correct this situation? Because clearly this is setting a very dangerous precedent for freedom of the press, freedom of speech, not to mention the complete abrogation of justice and due process in this case, Craig. But your final thoughts here on Julian Assange.
Well, at the Westminster level, it should not be forgotten that the Home Secretary, a government minister, can simply cancel the extradition. They can cancel any extradition, no matter what the judiciary have said about whether it should go ahead. You need two things for the extradition to take place. You need a judicial order, then you need the order by the Home Secretary. In this case, the Home Secretary issued the order, but a new Home Secretary can cancel it. So the extradition could simply be wiped out. And Theresa May did that, for example, in the case of Gary McKinnon. So that's the action Westminster should be taking. Westminster should be saying, this case is an abomination. It's a massive attack on freedom of speech. It's a massive attack on freedom of the press. It's a massive attack on the public's right to know. Because remember, freedom of speech, people think of it as, people have the wrong idea about freedom of speech. They think it merely means that somebody like me can, waffle on and say loads of stuff that they're not very interested in. But actually, freedom of speech is the freedom to know. Because if you stop people telling you things, you will never discover those things. And a lot of, especially American war crimes, which the world would not have known about were it not for Julian Assange, and all the vast, vast quantity of other stuff about government misdoings all over the world by all kinds of governments, which Julian Assange revealed, making him, I think, the greatest journalist the world has ever seen. So the danger of closing down that kind of free journalism in the interests of authoritarian government is extreme. So it should simply be cancelled by the Secretary of State. Westminster should and could cancel the extradition. As for the legal process, I am in fact quite hopeful. I think on a technicality, if you like, on the fact that Julian is an Australian citizen and his alleged crimes were allegedly committed extraterritorially, the American prosecution argues, and American court cases have shown, that means he is not entitled to American constitutional protections, including the First Amendment. The argument that means discrimination by nationality, therefore he cannot be extradited. I think that argument will hold. I don't see how the United States can get round that argument. And that gives the Americans a very strong incentive to drop the case or to settle the case in some way before the next hearing that they might lose. There's a cynical interpretation which goes the other way and says that this granting of a new appeal on these very limited grounds is merely a device to knock the whole thing back until after the US presidential election. And I can see that as a possibility, but it definitely is a possibility. But it is not my reading. My reading, from having been in the courtroom, seen the judges, watched the judges very closely, listened to the arguments and listened to what the judges said, I do think the judges themselves do see this as a serious problem for discrimination by nationality, and possibly a way out whereby they could prevent the extradition without having to accept that there were American war crimes, without having to accept that the United States spied on Julian in the embassy and threatened to kill or kidnap him, without accepting the freedom of speech argument or ruling on the freedom of speech argument. They could cancel it all on the technicality and get rid of it, because I do think it has now become, world opinion has changed in favour of Julian, both world public opinion and world political opinion has changed in world governmental opinion in Julian's favour, big change, even world media opinion. So I think they would welcome an out. So I am, for the first time, I'm actually hopeful we will see Julian home by Christmas.
That would be a fantastic Christmas present for him, his family, for the country, for everybody who supports this issue. Craig, I really hope that happens. And I'm going to bring up on screen, this is from your website, your Craig Murray's website here. You've got your various fundraising portals, support. There's other ways people can get involved in your campaign and what you're doing, Craig, as well. You've got people helping you as well. So if you want to give a shout out and how people can support what you're currently doing right now.
Yeah, firstly, I'm afraid it's simply true that if you want to stand by election, you need money, and we may all deplore the fact and think it's corrupt and wrong, but unless people contribute to my election fund, we're not going to get far in this campaign. So I do need people to go to my website, craigmurray.org.uk, find the Blackburn election fund and donate us some money. That would be very welcome. If you're outside the United Kingdom, there's a limit of £500, a little bit more than $500. Don't donate more than that, or it becomes an illegal foreign donation. But also, campaigning is hard work. You have to get there. You have to knock on doors. You have to get out leaflets. I'm around making speeches. We need people to do the campaigning, and we've had volunteers. We've had people here already from the United States. We've had people from Italy. We've had people from Germany. We've had people from Lithuania. We've had people from Turkey. We're gathering quite an international bunch of people here, and you may end up sleeping on the floor here in a sleeping bag. I can't promise you wonderful accommodation unless you've got your own money, but we need people. We really need people, and this is a campaign for what is good and what is right. It's a campaign for human rights, a campaign for genocide, and because we're all campaigning for the good, if you like, because we're all campaigning with our hearts for what is truly right and against spreading evil in the world. Roger Waters gave me a lovely message of endorsement saying this is a battle, an existential battle for the human soul. And that's if you like how it feels, because we're all fighting that battle for the human soul. There's a tremendous feeling of solidarity and comradeship and friendship between us all here. And I can promise anybody who comes will be extremely welcome, made very, very welcome indeed.
Yeah, we can see you've attracted a lot of support, Craig, right across the spectrum. Again, I would direct people to craigmurray.org. You look at the page, it's very visible at the top of his featured section, Craig Murray Blackburn Election Fund, lots of different options how you can get involved and support what I think is a very, very important effort right now. There's a lot at stake, folks, in the world, in Britain, in Europe, everywhere. And I think this is a really important flashpoint here. So we're going to say thank you, Craig. We really appreciate the effort you're making. You really put yourself out here. We know the level of commitment, personal commitment, physical commitment that's required as well to stand for any elected office. It is incredible. And we're very encouraged by you and also some of your other colleagues as well, and also from your new political party, the Workers' Party of Britain. There's some great candidates as well. So we'll be watching all of you. And yeah, that's all we've got time for this week, Craig. But thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you.